Have you ever paused, even for a moment, to consider a disquieting possibility that what we so readily label as love is, in truth, nothing more than a thinly veiled dread of utter solitude? Could it be that the seemingly innate human yearning for companionship is merely a sophisticated disguise, a clever tactic employed to evade the daunting task of confronting the vast emptiness that resides within the very core of our being? And furthermore, dare we entertain the notion that what we confidently define as a relationship is, perhaps, just another elaborate escape route, a carefully constructed path designed to lead us away from the one person we should be intimately acquainted with ourselves? There exists no truth closer to the bone than the profound discomfort we experience in the quietude of our own company. Carl Jung, in his profound wisdom, once implored us to envision ourselves upon our deathbeds. Imagine the room enshrouded in shadows, the cacophony of the world muted by a consciousness gradually, inexorably detaching itself from its physical vessel. And then, in that final, deafening silence, a question materializes, a whisper that cuts through the void. Did you truly live your own life, or did you merely accompany someone else on theirs? At some juncture in our lives, each and every one of us succumbs to the allure of that prescripted narrative: find a partner, fall in love, share a life, grow old together. It sounds idyllic, undeniably safe. Yet, conspicuously absent from this rosy portrayal is any mention of what is irrevocably lost in the process. No one dares to speak of the fragmented pieces of ourselves that wither and die in the name of harmony, of the dreams relegated to dusty shelves, of the desires forcibly silenced, of the soul bending slowly, gradually, until it forgets entirely how to stand upright, how to assert its own unique form. Jung understood that certain paths, the paths that lead to true self-discovery, demand silence, solitude, and sacrifice not of the self, but of the expectation of another. Because true individuation, that relentless pursuit of one's authentic self, never negotiates, never compromises. Truth, in its rawest form, cannot be shared with one who still cowers in fear of their own shadow, their own darkness. Society, with its programmed smiles and meticulously curated, high-definition weddings, offers no forgiveness to those who choose to walk alone, to those who dare to deviate from the well-trodden path. You are selfish, they whisper. You will inevitably end up alone. No one can truly be happy without a partner. These phrases, laden with judgment, arrive like inverted prayers, spoken more out of fear and societal conditioning than genuine wisdom. But what if they are fundamentally wrong? What if true fulfillment is not to be found in meeting the elusive right person, but rather in becoming the person that no one could ever hope to replace? This is not an argument against love itself. It is, instead, a passionate plea for choosing oneself, even if it means traversing desolate landscapes where few dare to tread. We will meticulously unearth Jung's profound insights, illuminating the dark, labyrinthine corridors of the mind, and revealing that which most people fear to even contemplate. Remaining single, choosing the path of solitude, can be the most radical act of freedom, a rebellion against societal norms, and, perhaps, the only true way to avoid the ultimate self-betrayal. You grew up hearing, incessantly, that you needed to find the one someone who would understand you implicitly, complete you in some inexplicable way, fill that nameless void that you felt acutely every night before drifting to sleep. From a tender age, culture relentlessly imposed this insidious idea that you will only be truly happy, truly fulfilled, when you are inextricably linked to someone else. And, conversely, if you are alone, something is inherently wrong with you, you are somehow deficient. The message is subtle, often unspoken, but it is relentless in its persistence. Single people are often perceived as incomplete, somehow suspicious, fundamentally broken, as if solitude itself were a character flaw, a glaring mark of personal failure. But what if the truth is the polar opposite? What if this insatiable need to love, to be loved, is merely a cleverly disguised form of escape? A defense mechanism erected to shield us from the terrifying prospect of facing our own soul-snaked, raw, vulnerable, without the comforting distractions of another. Jung recognized a fundamental truth that most people still actively avoid seeing. Most people do not actually love in the truest sense of the word. They cling desperately. They use the other person as a shield, a buffer against the inherent anxieties of their own existence. That is the true, insidious illusion of romantic love, the unwavering belief that another person, a savior figure, will somehow rescue us from ourselves, from our own internal struggles. You meet someone, you fall head over heels in love, you experience a surge of warmth, a newfound sense of purpose, and then the insidious process of adaptation begins small, almost imperceptible at first. Initially, you might change an opinion, ever so slightly, to avoid potential conflict. You might silently suppress a desire, deeming it unimportant. You sacrifice a cherished habit, telling yourself it's for the greater good. You label it maturity. You call it partnership. But in reality, you are slowly, steadily beginning to disappear, to fade into the background. And one day, without even realizing it has happened, you wake up and no longer recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. Your very essence has been gradually replaced by a compliant character, someone living in perpetual fear of losing what they have come to believe they cannot possibly live without. Jung did not despise love itself. What he vehemently despised was surrender, the surrender of autonomy, of creativity, of the necessary madness that fuels the journey to become one's true self. Romantic love, as it is often presented as an ideal, demands that you dissolve into the other person, constructing an identity built upon fusion and emotional dependence, and that very fusion, that merging of identities, ultimately kills what is most valuable: creative chaos, the very spark of individuality. A man, a woman, can only truly be themselves when they are alone, unburdened by the expectations of another. This truth is often heavier than most can bear, because being alone requires immense courage, and being with someone, anyone, is often just a beautifully orchestrated way to avoid that terrifying confrontation with the self. This is not about opposing relationships outright. It is about recognizing the profound psychological price that many people willingly pay in order to maintain the comforting illusion of completeness within a couple. Most couples, you see, live in an apparent state of peace, a carefully constructed facade. But look closer, peer beneath the surface. There are concessions being made, sacrifices that cost pieces of the soul. There are silences, vast and echoing, that hide drowned desires, dreams that have been abandoned. There are marriages that are not alliances of mutual respect and support, but rather desperate pacts of emotional survival. Jung warned, with characteristic gravity, that such unions can devolve into cages, gilded though they may be, where the will to self-realization slowly withers and dies, and romantic love, in practice, often becomes an emotional prison, signed with flowers and empty promises. Have you ever witnessed an artist attempting to create amidst constant noise and interruption? Have you ever tried to delve into the depths of your own thoughts while simultaneously managing someone else's ever-shifting moods? The soul that yearns to expand, to grow, needs space, both physical and emotional. But romantic love, as it is often practiced, demands containment, constant adjustments, endless negotiations: what to eat, who to talk to, how much time to dedicate to the other person, an internal committee constantly deliberating whether your choices are compatible with the relationship's meticulously defined boundaries. It is utterly exhausting, and behind all that incessant negotiation hides a profoundly dangerous idea that you only have value, only have worth, if you belong to something greater than yourself, a couple, a unit. Jung saw this fantasy as perilous, a siren song leading to destruction. He warned against projecting onto a partner everything that we deny within ourselves: your sensitivity, your intuition, your tenderness, all the qualities you deem weak or undesirable. Everything is externalized, projected outward, and thus you fragment yourself, mutilate yourself in order to fit neatly into the prescribed mold, and then, tragically, you call it love. But true love, authentic love, does not demand that you vanish, that you cease to exist as an individual. It does not ask you to negotiate your very essence, to dim your own light so as not to outshine the other, to hide your pain for the sake of maintaining a false sense of peace. The love that Jung defended, the love that he championed, was something entirely different, Amati, the love of one's destiny, one's chosen path of life as it is, absurdities and all. And it begins the very moment you cease seeking outside yourself what you must ultimately find within. You do not need someone to complete you, to make you whole. You need courage, the unwavering courage to face yourself in all your flawed and glorious entirety. The mettle to tread your own path, even when surrounded by voices branding it failure, is paramount. For it is in deliberate solitude that integrity takes root, and from that integrity all else blossoms. The quest for wholeness in another being ultimately weakens us, drawing our focus away from the sacred duty of self-completion. Perhaps the most vital question you need to confront today is this: do you genuinely yearn to love another? Or are you simply attempting to evade the complexities within yourself? Now, there is a truth you must acknowledge. Has there ever been a moment when, precisely when composure was most crucial, your mind fractured? That lapse in control transcends mere emotion, it's a mental break. It arises because we are predominantly conditioned to feel before we think, to react before we observe with clarity. The issue lies within our very structure. We were never taught to cultivate the mind as a resilient muscle. Consequently, every minor frustration escalates into an explosion, and each challenge becomes an internal defeat. But there exists an alternative approach, a structure grounded in the bedrock of neuroscience, applied philosophy, and silent mental disciplines that recalibrate your responses and reinstate you to the helm of your own being. Freedom has always demanded a price, and few possess the will to pay it. The notion of freedom may sound noble and inspiring, but when reality descends cold, silent, and devoid of guarantees, most flee back to the perceived safety of the familiar. Carl Jung grasped this truth with exceptional clarity. He understood that to inhabit true freedom, one must relinquish what society deems most valuable: belonging, acceptance, and the solace of emotional comfort. Solitude is not a fleeting trend or a mere aesthetic. It is a psychic battleground where the fragile crumble. The truly free individual must confront their reflection without masks, without distractions, without excuses. And that is a task almost universally avoided. Most prefer to dwell within emotional bubbles, enveloped by validation, distractions, and commitments that appear significant, but merely serve to fill the void with incessant noise. For Jung, solitude was never a form of punishment, but a vital condition, the necessary crucible for evolving beyond the ordinary, for ceasing to be a domesticated, reactive, conformist individual, and instead becoming the architect of one's own values. This individual is what he termed the individuated self, the one who has transcended the herd mentality. But such a transformation never occurs amidst constant praise and reassurance. The freedom Jung spoke of necessitates leaving the herd, and departing from the herd is a rupture, a form of mourning. You lose friends, lovers, and the comfort of predictability. But in exchange, you gain yourself. Jung lived this choice to its ultimate conclusion. His solitude was not accidental but a deliberate conviction. He immersed himself in his inner world, writing, walking, confronting his own thoughts to the very limits of sanity. His reflections reveal a man intimately acquainted with pain, yet choosing to persevere. For he understood that the pain of isolation was preferable to the mediocrity of adaptation. He perceived the social world as a stage of masks, marriages, conventions, convenient friendships, all distractions designed to avoid confronting the absurd and terrifying depths of existence. Jung yearned for more. He sought to unearth what lay concealed beneath centuries of illusion. And for that, he required silence. Solitude is that necessary silence. Without it, you merely echo what you hear, reacting to the expectations of others. You exist as a reflection, not as an authentic being. But there's a crucial point often overlooked: solitude is not synonymous with suffering. True solitude differs from the bitter sting of abandonment. It is not rejection. It is a conscious choice. It is the sacred space where thought ripens, where consciousness reorganizes itself, where inner chaos finds form, direction, and fire. Jung often reminded us that enlightenment is not attained by conjuring images of light, but by bringing the darkness into conscious awareness. And such darkness does not surface during romantic dinners or weekends at the mall. It reveals itself only when you are utterly alone, without distractions, without promises, without someone to rescue you from your own feelings. It is in that crucible that true philosophical thought is forged. And simultaneously, it is where many succumb, because solitude demands an emotional fortitude that the modern world fails to cultivate. We inhabit a society that rewards constant connection, oversharing, and the exposure of intimacy. Never have we been so surrounded, yet never have we been so profoundly empty. Silence terrifies because it compels you to confront what you have been evading for years. Jung did not believe that everyone was prepared for this confrontation. He viewed the philosopher, the creator, the solitary artist as an exception, a deviation, a mutation. The majority do not desire freedom. They crave direction, someone to dictate their actions, their feelings, their loves, their lives. Real freedom is unbearable for those who are unprepared. That is why, when you begin to distance yourself, judgment follows. You are labeled as changed, strange, in need of someone. They fail to understand that you are not seeking someone. You are seeking depth, truth, silence, and the resonance of your own thoughts until they finally utter something worth heeding. Freedom demands renunciation. You renounce the emotional comfort of someone awaiting your return. You renounce the shared life plan. You renounce automatic affection. But within that renunciation, something else is revealed: power. You become formidable, unpredictable, untamable. Nothing can be weaponized against you. You are independent. You are unyielding. You have no need to belong. Jung was branded as mad, misunderstood by many, rejected by some. But he remained steadfast on his own path. He did not live to please. He lived to tear away veils, to disrupt the peace of those slumbering beneath inherited falsehoods. Such a life cannot be confined within conventional molds, nor within relationships shaped by emotional contracts. Total freedom demands a willingness to traverse deserts without companionship, without a map, without the assurance of salvation. That is why Jung did not romanticize solitude. He saw it as a tool, a weapon, a method of purification. You begin to understand who you truly are when you no longer have anyone to please, when you don't need to explain your every step, justify your decisions, or temper your words to maintain another's equilibrium. In that untamed space, a stark truth emerges: freedom exacts the price of everything that once cradled you in comfort. Yet, that is the cost of becoming a whole being, rather than a diluted version of yourself. Marriage is often presented as the ultimate fulfillment, a joyous culmination, a final triumph, the badge of entry into adulthood. But beneath the smiling portraits and sentimental captions lies a deeper, more primal truth, rarely spoken aloud. For many, marriage isn't a celebration, but a containment, the cessation of discovery, the closing of doors, the interruption of expansion. Carl Jung perceived this with acute clarity. Traditional marriage thrives on predictability, fueled by repetition, habit, routine, and the illusion of comfort. But the creative spirit craves the opposite: chaos, silence, discomfort. Nothing magnificent is ever birthed in controlled conditions. Stability might be ideal for constructing homes, but it's often fatal for the genesis of ideas. Picture a man consumed by a mission, a vision, an inner calling that grants him no respite. That man requires time, unwavering focus, and undivided energy. Now, envision that same man, married, bound by daily demands, emotional obligations, and endless negotiations over trivial matters. The unseen cost is immense. Every decision becomes a matter of approval. Every step requires explanation. Every change must be negotiated, and the creative spark begins to dim, not abruptly, but gradually. Marriage transforms existential urgency into shared calendars. It replaces restlessness with consensus, profound truth with the unspoken agreement to maintain tranquility. At that juncture, many men surrender a part of themselves, trading their vocation for domestic harmony, smiling while knowing that something essential has been left behind. Jung would argue it is the will to self-realization that dies. The vital energy that fuels creation, rupture, and transcendence is now tamed by the desire to please. Traditional marriage demands a constant performance, being perpetually emotionally available, filtering thoughts, feelings, and dreams, becoming half of a project, half of a home, half of a story. But Jung did not believe in halves. He believed in the wholeness of the individual who chooses to be complete, even at the expense of societal approval. For one born to create, such renunciation is a prison sentence. Great ideas demand solitude, mental expanse, and a mind undivided between creative focus and the worry over mundane plans. The gilded cage is comfortable, beautiful, and safe, but it remains a cage nonetheless. Those who dare to create something larger than themselves cannot thrive behind bars, even if adorned with affection. Jung understood this intimately because he lived it. His writings were not conceived during cozy afternoons with a spouse. They were born in solitary mountains, in silent days, in nights of fever and delirium. It was there, in isolation, that he conceived ideas that continue to unsettle the world to this day. Now, consider how many ideas have you abandoned to preserve peace with another? How many projects have you shelved because they didn't align with the dynamics of a relationship? How many truths have you silenced to maintain comfort? Modern marriage, even with its promise of companionship, often demands shaping oneself into something manageable. And for a restless mind, that marks the beginning of a symbolic death. The price is steep but silent. It doesn't manifest immediately. It creeps in subtly when you avoid a topic, when you postpone a plan, when you choose silence over attention, and you label it love. But it is not love. It is fear of losing the little you have built, fear of rejection, fear of facing the world alone. Jung did not seek companions. He sought thinkers, individuals willing to lose themselves, deconstruct themselves, bleed intellectually until they discovered a new way of being. For that, one must be free from the fear of disturbing others, free from the obligation to smooth one's edges, free from the need to always have someone beside you. Marriage, as it exists today, often suffocates that freedom. It is an emotional contract laden with invisible clauses that demand silence, accommodation, and the postponement of dreams in the name of stability. But who decreed that stability is a virtue? Jung would provoke, what if instability is precisely what moves the soul? What if living intensely, even in solitude, is more honest than smiling beside someone who does not understand your depth? This is where many retreat, choosing to adapt, to remain, to surrender themselves. but some choose to walk away the path without applause, the quiet room, the night walk with their own shadow. And in that choice, something is born, not comfortable peace, but the untamed integrity of one who requires no explanation. Marriage can be beautiful, but for certain individuals it is too beautiful not to be dangerous. And when greatness is at stake, the beauty of the cage pales in comparison to the price of freedom. The mind requires space to be dangerous. Yet almost no one discusses this. They speak of thinking outside the box, of creating, of innovating. But they fail to mention that such a process demands something few can endure: being alone. Solitude, when embraced with awareness, transforms the mind into a weapon not of destruction, but of revelation. When you are alone, no one dictates the rhythm of your thought. There are no external expectations, no foreign emotions to consider, no demand to moderate the intensity of what you feel or conceive. It is you, your mind, and the abyss between what is and what could be. Jung understood this with almost brutal clarity. The absence of bonds was not a deficiency of love. It was a tactic, a method for purifying thought, a means of preventing ideas from becoming concessions. Relationships, regardless of their affection, generate noise, interference, too many opinions, too many emotions. All that emotional density is a constant invitation to moderation, to softening, to self-editing. But radical thought, the kind that truly moves the world, does not. The wellspring of true creation arises in those liminal spaces where permission to simply be must be sought. It is birthed in the profound stillness of solitude, in the unguarded hours when the world's gaze is averted, in those precious moments when no explanation is owed. Living apart, the mind begins a different kind of respiration, expanding into the unexplored territories of thought, daring to entertain ideas that might be deemed absurd, forging connections that would be censored if uttered aloud. It can be improper, exaggerated, even scandalous, and therein lies its very potency. Einstein did not formulate his groundbreaking theories amidst the clamor of family dinners. Tesla did not lay the cornerstones of modern electricity while placating marital discord. Camus did not confront the stark absurdity of existence while seeking his partner's approval. These men sequestered themselves not from arrogance, but from an acute and deeply felt necessity. For they understood, perhaps instinctively, that certain ideas require the sanctuary of a protected psychic womb, an environment devoid of the cacophony of the world, free from emotional interference, untainted by the constant surveillance of expectation. Imagine, if you will, the catastrophic interruption of a deep, intricate line of thought merely to resolve some domestic misunderstanding, soothe a fleeting insecurity, or offer a belated reply to a trivial message. It may seem minor, almost inconsequential, yet it is corrosive in its cumulative effect. The mind loses its tenuous thread. The nascent thought dissipates like morning mist, the vital creative energy scatters to the winds, and the idea that was on the very cusp of being born withers and dies. Few truly comprehend how often this insidious cycle repeats itself within the confines of marriages, courtships, and even the most well-intentioned relationships. Carl Jung would liken it to a slow, insidious poison, a gradual and relentless dilution of the very will itself. And the most tragic aspect of it all is that it comes to feel perfectly normal. Most accept this state of intellectual mediocrity as simply the price of love, an unavoidable part of the bargain. But the solitary creator, the one who walks a different path, refuses to accept it. He chooses something else entirely. He chooses to awaken when the inner muse calls, to immerse himself in thought until the very mind burns with the intensity of it, to write without the tyranny of the clock, to ruthlessly destroy what he painstakingly created the day before and begin anew, all without having to justify his perceived madness to anyone. The absence of bonds, in this particular context, is not a void, but a state of profound fertility, a vast expanse of psychic space, a fire that burns eternally because no one demands that it be moderated or extinguished. Of course, such a choice inevitably comes at a cost. There will be no one waiting expectantly in the warmth of the living room, no cozy couples dinners or leisurely Sunday meals. You will likely be perceived as strange, eccentric, even cold and unfeeling. But in return, you gain something that no one else can ever bestow upon you: the unadulterated freedom to think as far as your soul can possibly venture. Jung did not view this as a sacrifice to be endured, but rather as a sacred mission, a profound and solemn task, the task of thinking the unthinkable, of feeling the unbearable, of walking to the very precipice of the human experience and returning with something new, something transformative. And that sacred task demands a mind unfettered, a spirit unbound. And a free mind, in turn, requires a life liberated from the incessant need for external validation. It is not about harboring hatred for love, but rather about deeply understanding that certain bonds, however beautiful and comforting they may initially seem, ultimately suffocate the very flame that you most desperately need to keep alive. You have already felt it, haven't you? You have already experienced that moment when an idea, shimmering with potential, had to be postponed indefinitely because someone else needed you, demanded your immediate attention in that very moment. You have already interrupted an intense flow of writing because there was a pending conversation looming, a simmering discomfort to resolve, an emotion to manage, and no one explicitly forced you to do so. But you went anyway, and in that moment you irrevocably lost something precious. You lost a piece of yourself, a fragment of your creative soul. The solitary creator learns, often through painful experience, to fiercely protect that inner sanctuary as a monk protects his sacred temple, because he knows, deep in his heart, that true greatness is subtle, often elusive. It does not shout for attention, it does not insist on being heard. It appears in the most unexpected moments, and if you are not fully prepared to receive it, it will simply vanish without a trace. The free mind is inherently wild, untamed. It needs to run alone and unburdened, needs the vast expanse of open fields, needs sleepless nights fueled by inspiration and slow, contemplative mornings. It simply does not fit neatly into shared schedules or in apartments meticulously built for two. It yearns to overflow, to burn with creative intensity, to destroy and rebuild, to constantly reinvent itself. And above all else, it craves silence. Because only in the profound depths of silence can chaos begin to find its true form. And only in the sacred crucible of solitude can mere thought be alchemized into profound and lasting truth. There inevitably comes a pivotal moment when you must finally decide whose life is truly yours, not merely in theory or abstract principle, but in the concrete reality of practice. Because the vast majority of people claim to be free, yet they live their lives as mere employees of others' expectations, constantly seeking approval. They profess to choose for themselves, yet every single step they take is meticulously filtered through the paralyzing fear of judgment, the crippling fear of rejection, and the gnawing fear of utter loneliness. Choosing yourself is far more than a simple act of courage or self-assertion. It is, in essence, an act of war, a silent yet defiant declaration that you will no longer negotiate your own integrity, that you will no longer compromise your deepest truth. Jung knew with unwavering conviction that such a profound choice inevitably comes with a heavy price. Because the very moment you decide to place yourself at the very center of your own existence, everything that previously orbited you out of mere convenience begins to destabilize, to crumble and fall away. People drift away, plans collapse like houses of cards, and relationships, once seemingly solid, shatter into irreparable fragments. But what ultimately remains is you bare, unadorned, free, and finally irrevocably whole. Most people simply do not want that kind of raw, unvarnished freedom. They crave the sanitized, edited version, the freedom that comes with a detailed instruction manual, with a guaranteed supply of affection, with a comforting and predictable soundtrack. But real freedom is brutal, often empty, and undeniably dangerous. It does not come accompanied by thunderous applause or accolades. It comes with a deafening silence and with the total and unwavering responsibility for every single choice you make, for every single path you choose to follow. True sovereignty is not about ruling over others or exerting dominance. It is about not being ruled by anyone else, not by the dictates of culture, not by the insidious power of lack, and certainly not by the crippling grip of fear. You know you are unequivocally on that arduous path when you finally cease asking whether other people agree with your decisions, when you begin to live your life without constantly seeking permission, when you can confidently say no and feel absolutely no guilt whatsoever, when you choose to walk alone even when everyone around you vehemently insists that you are wrong. That profound choice inevitably frightens and isolates. But it also liberates you in ways you could never have imagined, because you begin to realize something that no one ever bothered to tell you: the life you truly yearn to live simply does not fit into the prefabricated molds you were so readily offered. And in order to truly live it, you will inevitably have to betray expectations, disappoint those who hold you dear, and ultimately let down those who projected a version of you that never truly existed in the first place. This is precisely where so many people ultimately give up, defeated. They retreat back to the safety of lukewarm relationships, predictable jobs that offer a false sense of security, and meticulously crafted plans that disturb absolutely no one. They call it peace, but deep down in the hidden recesses of their hearts, they know that it is nothing more than a profound and tragic surrender. Jung would implore us to become who you are, but no one ever truly teaches you how to accomplish this seemingly simple yet profoundly challenging task. Because to truly be who you are, in all your messy, imperfect glory, means letting go of the perceived safety of being who others approve of constantly seeking their validation. It means fearlessly placing yourself at the very center of your own life without cowering in fear of being labeled selfish. Selfishness is not about thinking of yourself, it is about demanding that others do the thinking for you. The person who chooses themselves, in the truest sense of the word, finally stops delegating their own life. No longer does she cast blame for her discontent. She doesn't await rescue, nor does she require understanding to forge ahead. She is sufficient unto herself, a state that unnerves others, for one self-reliant does not easily yield. She feels no compulsion to please in order to belong, no need to feign agreement to retain affection, no reason to conceal her intensity to fit in. Such a person is perceived as dangerous, for she is free. And in a world predicated on emotional dependency, a free soul represents a threat. Choosing oneself is akin to plunging from a precipice without assurance of solid ground below. Yet, she leaps not impulsively, but with awareness, recognizing that remaining stagnant is a form of living death, accepting meager emotional offerings in exchange for companionship, bartering her soul for a semblance of security. This is not life, but mere survival masquerading as routine. Jung never implored us to seek happiness, but rather wholeness, even if it necessitates relinquishing all that currently provides comfort. For only through the loss of these safeguards can we unearth our true selves. Solitude, at such a depth, transcends mere absence. It becomes fertile ground, a sanctuary where one's will takes root, one's vision materializes, and one's existence finds its ultimate purpose. The one who chooses themselves does not crave understanding, only faithfulness to their own truth, even if it costs them the love of others, even if it turns the world against them. Ultimately, the greatest act of love is not self-abandonment. So you have journeyed this far, and now you comprehend the significance of it all. It signifies that, on some level, you already discerned that the life they peddled with promises and emotional stability is not your destined path. Perhaps you have attempted it, perhaps you are still striving. Yet, an inner restlessness persists, whispering that there is something more. And indeed there is. But that more lies not in finding another, but in becoming oneself, someone who does not require external approval to exist, someone who can endure solitude without crumbling, someone who constructs an existence not for acceptance, but for authenticity. But Jung said that one who has a why can endure almost anyhow, but that why you only find when you silence the world around you, and that demands courage, detachment, losing the comforts that kept your soul asleep. The world does not champion your freedom, but rather your conformity. Yet, there comes a juncture when adapting becomes synonymous with a slow, agonizing demise. Now, you face two choices: revert to normalcy and pretend this awakening never occurred, or embrace the risk of living as one indebted to no one, as one who carries within their heart the only allegiance that truly matters: unwavering self-loyalty. I endured a prolonged period of solitude to grasp this truth. And it was not a superficial singleness filled with lively nights and dating apps. It was a solitude that silenced everything around me. I recall a particular rainy night, sitting on the floor, leaning against the cold wall of my room, not out of theatrics, but sheer exhaustion. And for the first time, I desired no one. I craved neither conversation nor rescue. I yearned to listen to myself, to comprehend myself, to rebuild myself. And there, in that almost primal state of presence, I realized I was whole, wounded yet whole, alone but free, afraid but honest. And that was when everything began to coalesce. If this message has resonated with you, it was not by chance. Life does not extend such messages to those still slumbering, it whispers them to those who have already begun to awaken. If these words have struck a chord within you, I invite you to subscribe and activate notifications, ensuring you don't miss the next step in your journey of self-discovery. Because in the end, the greatest act of love is to never abandon yourself.